Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating paper published back on January 1st, 2010 in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. The study has this brilliant title, Turning the Knots in Your Stomach into Bows, Reappraising Arousal Improves Performance on the GRE. Authored by Jeremy P. Jamieson, Wendy Berry-Mendez, Aaron Blackstock, and Tony Schmatter, this research proves how simply tweaking the way you think about stress can literally boost your standardized test scores. It is an incredible look at the mind-body connection, and I am super excited to unpack this whole shebang with you today.
We're going to kick things off with this classic quote from Albert Einstein, which the researchers actually used to open their own paper. It perfectly hits the nail on the head regarding the uncounted factor of test taking. I mean, think about it. We spend so much time counting our study hours and our practice scores, but we almost never account for that rush of nervous energy we all get right before a high-stakes exam. And as we're about to see, that uncounted feeling, it might just be the most important factor of all.
All right, let's run through our roadmap for today real quick. 1. The test anxiety problem. 2. The reappraisal hypothesis. 3. The practice test experiment. 4. Measuring physiological responses. 5. Real-world GRE findings. And 6. Redefining our internal states. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The test anxiety problem. The default response. We've all been there, right? The sweaty palms, the knots in your stomach right before a big presentation or a test. Most of us default to assuming that's a guaranteed sign we're about to fail. But biologically speaking, arousal is actually a pretty fuzzy term. It really just means your sympathetic nervous system is firing up. Your body is mobilizing resources to handle whatever is in front of you. Actually, scratch that assumption that it's a bad thing. It absolutely does not automatically indicate a negative state of threat. It could just as easily be signaling a challenge response. Moving on to Section 2, the reappraisal hypothesis, changing the meaning. So, this brings us to the million-dollar question that drove Jamieson and his team. What happens if we actively intervene and change how someone interprets those physical feelings? They hypothesize that if students simply reframe that bodily arousal as a challenge instead of a threat, their minds and bodies would basically sync up to perform better. They believe that encouraging people to reappraise their arousal could totally break that crippling link between arousal and anxiety. Section 3, the practice test experiment, testing in the lab.
To actually test this out, the researchers recruited students who are gearing up to take the real GRE within the next 3 months. They brought them into the lab for a practice test and split them into 2 very carefully designed groups. Check out the contrast here. The control group on the left got a pretty standard cover story. They were told that because it's normal to feel anxious, their saliva was just being collected to measure arousal. But the reappraisal group on the right, they got a very specific psychological intervention. They were explicitly told that nervous energy was basically a secret weapon, and that recent research shows arousal doesn't hurt you, it actually helps you perform.
The reappraisal group read this exact sentence right before starting their practice test. Look at how direct that is. If you find yourself feeling anxious, simply remind yourself that your arousal could be helping you do well. The researchers were directly planting the seed that their bodily panic was, in reality, performance fuel. Section 4. Measuring physiological responses. Inside the body. But, hey, talk is cheap, right? To prove this wasn't just some placebo effect happening entirely in the students' heads, the scientists had to measure what was happening inside their bodies. Looking at this timeline, you can track exactly when they collected those spit samples. Baseline sample first, then the group instructions, then another saliva sample right before the practice test. And the ultimate finale, tracking down these exact same students 1 to 3 months later to see how they scored on the official GRE. So why the spit? Well, they were looking for a biological marker called salivary alpha amylase, or SAA for short. SAA acts as a biological indicator, showing us precisely when the sympathetic nervous system kicks into high gear. By measuring the difference between the baseline and the post-manipulation sample, the researchers could literally see if the students' bodies were physically stepping up to the challenge. And wow, the physiological results here are super clear. Look at that massive spike in the light gray bar on the right. That's the reappraisal group. Their SAA levels absolutely surged after reading that short instruction, showing their bodies were physically engaging with the challenge. Meanwhile, the control group on the left actually saw a slight dip, meaning they were either less engaged or maybe just feeling totally threatened by the test. For the stats fans tuning in, this translates to an absolutely massive effect size of D equals 1.01. Just for context, in psychology, anything over 0.8 is considered large, so a 1.01 means this was an incredibly significant physiological shift. Just by changing their mindset, their sympathetic nervous system leaped into action. Crazy, right? Section 5. Real-world GRE findings. The actual test.
So did all that extra biological engagement actually move the needle on their test scores? Well, notice the dark bar on the right. That represents the practice GRE math scores taken right there in the lab. It clearly shows the reappraisal group significantly outperforming the control group. Now, interestingly, the verbal scores didn't show much difference. The researchers point out this is likely because math requires more active executive processing and working memory, which a challenge state directly enhances, while verbal sections rely more on long-term memory retrieval.
That lab performance gap on the math section gave us a very strong effect size of D equals 0.82. That absolutely proves the immediate power of just telling yourself your nerves are helpful. It works right then and there.
But here's where the study goes from just interesting to totally groundbreaking. 1 to 3 months later, when the students took the real high-stakes GRE, the reappraisal group still dominated the math section. This graph shows the official ETS score reports. The fact that a brief mindset intervention in a lab carried over into the real world months later is just mind-blowing.
And get this, the effect size on the actual GRE math section was a staggering D equals 1.03. The paper notes that this massive, lasting impact suggests that the students with the greatest physiological activation back in the lab reaped the biggest benefits when it was time for the real deal.
To quote the researchers directly, the findings were crystal clear. Reappraisal participants exhibited a significant increase in SAA and outperformed controls in the GRE math section. The elevated physiological engagement was directly paired with superior math performance. The mind shifted the body, and the body elevated the mind.
Finally, Section 6, redefining our internal states, shifting the mindset.
So how did these students actually feel about their experience months after the experiment ended? When surveyed after the real GRE, the results here speak volumes. The reappraisal group strongly believed their arousal helped their performance, scoring a 3.86 compared to the control group's 2.57. Plus, they spent significantly less time worrying about feeling anxious and felt far less unsure of themselves. They had fundamentally redefined their relationship with their own internal state.
The paper drops this great nugget by referencing a classic review on physiological toughness by Deanspear. Naturally evoked peripheral catecholamines never seem to be too high for optimal performance. Let's translate that into plain English. Your naturally occurring stress hormones basically never get too high to hurt your performance as long as you're channeling them as a challenge.
This explainer completely proves that our biology is deeply dependent on how we cognitively appraise the situation. So the next time you face a high-stakes moment, a massive standardized test, a brutal meeting, a big speech, remember this study. Ask yourself, what if the knots in your stomach aren't a sign of impending failure? What if that nervous energy is exactly what your body needs to help you win? Try reappraising your arousal and just see what you can achieve.